My paper is on the intellectual slavery and the wholesale erasure of the working class from the digital sphere. And the aim of this paper is to explore methods that tech companies use to marginalize society and erase the working class from participating online in order to exploit free labor and perpetual monetary streams. Um, Cultural studies about online culture becomes outdated really fast. When I first started this paper, I had a hard time getting my professor on board to the idea that culture is holistically manipulated and that tech companies are actively trying to make us isolated and miserable so that we are more easily exploited. I spent the whole summer kind of putting this argument together. And then, of course, last week, the documentary The Social Dilemma was released. If you've seen it, it's kind of, I spent all this time and then boom, there it is. But I mean, that's the way it goes. So if you haven't seen it, it's great. It talks about how tech companies are actively trying to make us miserable and to fight amongst each other ourselves. Daryl, I think you'd find it very interesting. Politically, it's a minefield. But I'm going to talk about a little bit of that um, a little bit later. Um, but the primary focus of the paper um, is within this framework, um, in particular, how poor people are targeted and manipulated. So, the next slide. This paper started the way that many academic papers are started, I guess, is through a late night rant on a message board. And I kept rambling and ranting, and I realized I had several pages that I could use for a paper. The discussion board was for a class I was taking where we read Talk Thompson's Netizens, Revolutionaries, and the Inalienable Right to the Internet from the book that's shown here on the slide. In it, Thompson saw accessing and sharing information on the web as a human right that could usher in a new era of democracy by using the internet as a way to bring positive change that supersedes borders and governments. And I quote, the creation of a truly global discourse and the birth of the post national citizen. Of course, the book was published in 2012, just a short time after the Arab Spring and Occupy Wall Street, when we had groups like Anonymous that were using the internet to combat oppressive governments and multinational companies. So why not see a rosy future? He saw a very bright future ahead of us, but like all things tech related, becomes outdated very quickly. So here, we are in an age with massive tech companies. The largest, Amazon, Apple, Facebook, Google, are worth $5 trillion combined. Bring in more wealth than some nations. With the vast majority of the content on these sites being user generated for little to no cost at all to the company itself. So even the most, can you hear me all right? And all that. Yeah. Okay. So, even the most novice Marxist knows what happens when a tiny percent of the population is reaping the monetary benefit from the work of billions of people, right? So we see companies like Google having the power to push certain information and suppress others, especially negative information about themselves or paid advertisers. We see Facebook deciding who can and who cannot post about political views, which views are valid, which oppositional views should be muted. Um, the world increasingly relies on a single source, Wikipedia, for information, which is also volunteer generated content, um, for the facts, which can be manipulated, especially with a new paid partnership with Google and Wikipedia. So now we have a homogenized power controlling the world's information. So, in terms of class struggle, we are seeing tech companies move services away from free or one time payment models to monthly paid subscriptions like Microsoft Suite, Adobe Suite, others. We all know this, we all use them. Um, and we can think back a few weeks ago, a month ago, with that photo that was being sent around online of the two school children using Taco Bell Wi-Fi to do their remote learning online, and how we were all appalled to realize such the divide that people cannot even afford Wi-Fi at home. Um, but if working families can't afford $50 a month, um, for Wi-Fi, they're not going to be able to afford $150 a year for Microsoft Office or $250 a year for Photoshop, which effectively cuts the working class out of professional, academic, and cultural conversations online, right? So I kind of threw up some stuff here in the slide. And one being Spotify, which I'm going to talk about in the next slide, which I have a huge problem with, which I call a nanny site, along with Bandcamp. So nanny site is a term I came up with, where they have strict rules to control users, and these strict rules punish poor folks and keep them from being able to participate on these platforms. So, so we see Spotify and Apple moving away from purchasing media like music to paid subscriptions. If you cannot keep up with the monthly subscriptions, then your catalog is gone, right? If you cannot keep up with your subscription for Microsoft or Adobe, then the work that you have been working on is held hostage until you can pay for that again. So for lower income artists, there are other roadblocks on places like Spotify and Bandcamp. Spotify could work like YouTube with anyone being able to upload music. But instead, they only allow artists with label representation to upload material on their platform. Independent artists can pay third-party intermediaries to do this for them, which again punishes the poor and keeps them from joining this platform, and it keeps artists from being able to move ahead. When every turn is monetized. Bandcamp is another nanny site that puts up roadblocks for working class artists from competing. They require certain certain visual and audio file types that require very expensive programs to use. Here for fun. So actually, I just released an album this morning. It's been a very busy week, so I've been dealing with Bandcamp myself. So even with album art, they want you to have a very specific file size. So for fun, I put up this Frankie Cosmos album art where she very clearly made an album art using paint, and then just went into to preview and change the dimensions of the image so that Bandcamp would allow her to use it. Of course, Frankie Cosmos, if you know her, she's the daughter of Phoebe Cates and Kevin Kline, so I think she could afford $250 a year for Photoshop. But I kind of like that she was kicking back um, against the system in that respect. Um, but then we can get into some more dire areas. So I mentioned the social dilemma earlier, which documents how platforms like Facebook manipulate users to create unhealthy mental conditions, and how miserable users generate more revenue than happy users, somewhere around 8 times in some cases. So here's a chart from the documentary using CDC data to show suicide rates in teen and preteen girls jumping for teens up 70% and for preteens 151% since social media became available on cell phones, right? So they're constantly checking it. So this is an extreme example of how manipulating users emotionally and creating a larger divide economically affects society. You would think that extreme circumstances would be bad for business, but it is not bad for business. Let's see, let me check the time real quick. All right, I'll speed it up a little bit. So Facebook seemed to figure out what the American government already knows, which is that 40% of Americans cannot afford a surprise bill at or over $400. The other bit of information they seem to have figured out is that poor Americans donate a larger percentage of their income than wealthier Americans to charities. So in the last 5 years, over 45 million people have donated over $3 billion through Facebook fundraisers. While Facebook does not collect fees from donations to charitable organizations, they do collect fees from personal fundraisers. So families who are going through a traumatic situation and they need money quickly, that's when Facebook decides they need a cut. To the tune of 2.6% plus 30 cents every time someone makes a donation. GoFundMe is a similar platform that most of us know about. They charge 2.9% and 30 cents per donation, and they have collected over $9 billion since its inception in 2010. So keeping users miserable isn't difficult. In the film, Shoshana Zuboff, which a lot of you all would know her, Harvard professor, she's written on the subject quite a bit, says Facebook conducted what they call massive scale contagion experiments. One thing they conducted is that we now know we can affect real world behavior and emotions without ever triggering the user's awareness, which is really scary. So a nation, a world without poverty is bad for tech companies, and they know it, and they are working on it. Creating a world of disenfranchised people is easy when you have all the capital and all the means of communication. So what do we know about, what can we do? We can demand regulation. We can demand a breakup of monopolies. We could unplug from social media. For services like Microsoft, it's much more difficult. This is kind of a funny image that I picked that was in the news recently. So people like Bill Gates have amassed huge fortunes that can be used to influence governmental policy and social change. So this image is an anti-vaxxer demanding that we say no to Bill Gates. I'm not an anti-vaxxer. I just liked the image here. But but it does show how the super wealthy can decide which charities and social programs get funding and which of us in society get left in the dark. Um, I mentioned earlier that lower income groups spend more money of their income on charity, but that's no match for just a single billionaire who can make or break a nonprofit in one action. If we are not able to regulate tech companies soon, the world could see a drastically marginalized groups being exploited as for profit companies increasingly control government policy and society as a whole, and poor users will be erased from the online conversation. And that was my super quick presentation.